This is an introduction to chapter 2 of the book Engaging with God, A Biblical Theology of Worship by David Peterson. And in chapter 2, he's talking about honoring, serving, and respecting God. Let's look at a couple of key ideas that you'll encounter as you read chapter 2. I want to help prep you for what you're going to see to make sense out of it as you go. He's going to study a number of the key Old Testament and New Testament words that are used to describe the worship of God or describe people's response to God. As he takes the initiative and as he reveals himself, then this is how people respond to him. Now, just a note about how word studies are performed in biblical studies. Usually, it starts with looking at the Hebrew word and the meaning of the Hebrew word. And in the Bible, in ancient Hebrew, really the only source of ancient Hebrew is the Bible itself. And so we look at the ways that words are used in the Bible in different settings, whether they're ordinary life settings or whether they're in worship-type settings. We look at the meaning of those words. And then we look at the Greek, because the New Testament was written in Greek. And so usually a word study will start by looking at secular Greek and how a word is used. We have many, many documents from the secular Greek world or how the word was used in the Greek concepts of worship and the Greek philosophies. And then we'll compare that to the way that the words are used in the Greek Septuagint. The Septuagint is abbreviated LXX. That's just the translation of the Old Testament into Greek. And it took place in the century just before the coming of Christ. And so by looking at the comparison between the Hebrew and the Greek, we get some idea about how at least the translators of the Septuagint thought about the Hebrew words and how they tried to communicate those concepts in Greek words. And then we look at the New Testament Greek, and so we kind of build a picture for the meaning of these words. And so in this chapter, you'll see he starts with the secular Greek, moves to the Septuagint, and then compares that to the Hebrew, and then concludes by looking at those word meanings and those word groups in New Testament Greek. And what he discovers is that there are three key groups of words in the Bible that describe different aspects of worship. The first group has to do with homage and submission. And it's primarily words that talk about bowing down or kneeling down before God, a posture of submission, a posture of receiving. And so those words describe a heart attitude or action toward God of adoration and of paying homage to Him. And then there's another set of words that describe worship of God in terms of service, that the Old Testament talks about serving the Lord or alternately of serving false gods. And those words related to service, those apply both to the ritual activity of the Old Testament temple and all the sacrificial system, but they also apply to an overall attitude of life, an overall relationship of allegiance and surrender and obedience to God. And then the third group of words has to do with reverence and respect. And this is a smallest of the three, and primarily it draws on the Old Testament concept of the fear of the Lord, that the fear of the Lord being a whole attitude and approach to life. And so what you're going to see as you look at these three word groupings and these three responses is that they're communicated, or they're expressed rather, at times through the ritual system, the Old Testament sacrificial system with the priests and all their duties, and at other times they're expressed through individual response and individual lifestyle, individual worship of God. And so that's what you're going to look for as you read chapter 2 about honoring, serving, and respecting God.